to CEI Women's Business Center presentation on grants for small business. We are a home for women in Maine who want to start and grow their own business, and I'm Sarah Gret, Director of the CEI Women's Business Centers. We work to build a network of peers, experts, and advocates who understand the challenges that disproportionately affect female entrepreneurs and provide resources to meet those challenges. We offer a variety of workshops and events, ranging from 1-hour topic-specific workshops to longer-term peer cohort programming that focuses on topics such as professional development, public speaking, and tech startup. We also offer free, confidential, one-on-one advising to meet your business needs. Our program is hosted at Coastal Enterprises, which helps to grow good jobs, environmentally sustainable enterprises, and shared prosperity in Maine and rural regions across the country by integrating financing, business and industry expertise, and policy solutions. We are funded in large part through the Small Business Administration. One of the most common questions we get at the Women's Business Center is, I am a woman starting or growing a business. Is there a grant for me? In response to that question, we are pleased to share this webinar and the accompanying guide to grants. It has been a pleasure to work with Elaine Theriault-Currier, who developed these resources for us. I'm going to hand it over to you, Elaine, for the remainder of the presentation.
Thanks, Sarah. Welcome, everyone. Very excited to dive into this webinar with you. I'm going to share my screen and just start with a little bit about me. As Sarah said, I've been working with CEI Women's Business Center on the guide to grants for small businesses and this accompanying webinar. I have a background in rural economic development in central Maine. And in this work, I developed expertise in helping small businesses find the grant funding opportunities and financing incentives to grow their business. Enjoyed that so much that I struck out on my own and founded Pen Name, my PR and grant writing consultancy for small businesses and startups. So let's dive into the webinar. This webinar, as we mentioned, is an accompaniment to the Grant Resource Guide for small businesses, which we recommend that you use as a tool to understand how to think about the grant process, how to find grants that are a good fit for you, and how to write a compelling application. This is a comprehensive guide to local, state, and federal funding programs for for-profit business applicants. So we've done a deep dive into all of the grant opportunities that are specifically for for-profit business applicants. It doesn't necessarily mean that all for-profit businesses will be eligible for every grant that is in the guide, but it does mean that as a for-profit business, you may apply if you meet additional levels of criteria. The grant was published in June 2021, so the information that is included is accurate as of that date. So we do encourage you to do your own research to follow up on some of the data that we provide, whether it's about a deadline. Sometimes deadlines change. We tend to keep it, a month because dates, one day is a Friday, next year it's a Saturday. But it also, you would want to research and make sure that the funding priorities for each organization are the same. Every few years, some funders, kind of reassess their funding priorities. So again, this is a very comprehensive guide, but we do encourage you to follow up and ensure its accuracy. I also wanted to mention what state and federal funding programs are. So at the state level, a state grant, which we'll talk about a lot, is a grant opportunity that's funded by an organization at the state level. So let's say the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development, the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. At the federal level, these organizations are just the next level up from those agencies. So it's the U.S. Department of, it's actually the U.S. Economic Development Administration, USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture. That's what we mean when we say state and federal programs. So we encourage you to use this guide as a resource, whether on its own or as a complement to conversations you may have with an advisor who can help determine which funding opportunities may be the best fit for you and provide some guidance as you actually apply. So this webinar is going to be structured just like the grant guide. We're going to talk about some tips for the application process and the grant search. Then we'll dive into the funding categories of the grants that are listed in the grant guide. And then we'll end with some concluding thoughts on the grant process as a whole. So we'll start with tips for the grant search. Our first tip is timing is everything. And this is both in terms of time in a calendar sense, but also time in terms of where you are in your business cycle and stage of growth. Grants are rarely the first form of funding that you will receive for your business. You'll typically use, your own investment through bootstrapping. You may receive funding through family and friends. You may secure a loan. You may even do some type of crowdfunding or a pitch competition. Or you may even go through a business development program that will help you go from your idea to an actual business plan. You may be a few customers. Those are really the first steps that you'll want to take. And then you can inquire into grants. There are very few grantors that fund true early stage or seed entrepreneurs or businesses. And even then, they'll want to see that you've done some work towards building your business and that you might have received some sort of funding. You've put in some capital or, other people have. So again, not usually your first step. You're going to want to have some history behind you. In terms of the calendar, if a grant has a deadline, it's typically within what we call grant season of January to May. Many of the grants in the guide have rolling deadlines or no deadline. So you can apply anytime during the year. But if there is a deadline, it's usually within that, first and second quarter of the year. This is also important because if you have a project that you want to fund in August, grants may not be the answer for you because there wouldn't be any funding during that time of year. You would have to wait to apply. Maybe your grant's due in March, the funding you wouldn't receive till June. So think about that as you're thinking about the types of projects and investments that you're planning for your business. It's also important to note that a grant application might not be live until 2 weeks prior to the deadline. So we do have some tips coming up about ways to prepare ahead of those 2 weeks, but just know that when your grant has a deadline, you're going to be extremely busy on those 2 weeks prior to the deadline because you'll be submitting all of your documentation, writing your narrative. So it's important for you to know that in advance and think about what your business's busy time is and whether a deadline will even work for you within that time period. The second tip is to beware of scams. Now, there are so few grant opportunities for for-profit businesses. Traditionally, grants are for nonprofits. Funders really want that tax-exempt 501c3 status. So because there are so few grants for for-profits, scammers see an opportunity. And so we want to make sure that you're applying to legitimate, credible organizations because in a grant application, you'll be providing a lot of confidential business information. So the first tip is to not apply for grants that require an entry fee or a purchase. When you go to a grant website, there should be a document that states rules and regulations, grant guidelines, that type of thing. And there should be a statement in that document that says an entry fee or purchase is not required in order to apply for the grant or to increase your likelihood of receiving grant funding. The second tip is to confirm that you are sending business or financial information to a credible organization. There are a few ways to do this. The first is you'll want to be careful about email addresses. For example, if you're applying to the Small Business Administration, the SBA, all of their email addresses will be at sba.gov. And you can typically confirm this by going to the grant website. And in the URL, if it says www.sba.gov, that's probably going to be the end of their email address. So if it's sba.com, it would be sba.com, but don't send anything to an sba.com because it's not the Small Business Administration. The second step that you could do to confirm is if there's a grant officer or a contact person that's listed in the grant, search them on LinkedIn. Make sure that they are actually part of the organization, that they have a legitimate looking biography. And thirdly, you can always check with CEI advisor, because CEI has wonderful connections with funders throughout the state and at the local level, at the federal level. And they'll be able to tell you if an organization that you're interested in is legitimate, if it's credible, or if they've never heard of them before, and they may recommend you do some additional research to make sure that they're a legitimate funder. The third tip is to understand eligibility, which is, are you the person, can you apply for a grant? And if you apply for the grant, will you be accepted to apply, or will you be turned away because you're not the type of applicant that they're looking for? So there's a few components to this. The first is certain grants at the state and federal level. Again, remember that's the Maine Department of, or the US Department of, require that the city or town in which your business is located, which might be different from where you live. So where your business is located, apply on your behalf. So what you'll want to do if you find a grant like this and you're interested in applying, you'll want to talk to the town manager of the city or town in which your business is located before going too deep down the process, because the town manager has to decide whether they would be interested in applying for your project on your behalf. Now, you will typically write the grant and do all of the work, and the town may have to sign some documents. They'll probably have to be the one to, hit submit, enter all of your information or email it. But ultimately, you would be doing the work and they would be the ones to do the final sign off. There are additional requirements to this that we'll talk about later on if a city or town is applying on your behalf. But the second component to eligibility is when it's a grant for a for-profit business, they often only are looking at applicants that can show that their project will lead to job growth or, some sort of major revenue growth, GDP growth, especially in an industry that is, important to the state. So what this means is it's often not enough to be a woman in small business. That's fantastic, but there are additional eligibility criteria. You're going to have to show how your project will allow you to hire, additional workers, how you will, maybe increase your procurement of grain from a local supplier. Maybe you're going to double it or triple it. And so maybe that will lead to more jobs. Again, because there are so few grants in the for-profit space, funders are looking to make a community or statewide impact. And how you would do that with a for-profit business is often through jobs or GDP growth. So again, you'll have to show that your project does this. Tips for when you've found a grant and you're ready to apply, you're going to want to put together a really compelling narrative. So the first tip we have is to prepare ahead of time. Again, that grant portal might only be live 2 weeks before the deadline. But in order to do some work ahead of time, we recommend that you find the previous year's application to begin preparing your responses and paperwork. So most grant websites will have a link to their previous application or a PDF of the previous year's 2020 grant application, and you'll be able to understand what type of budgetary documents and organizational information are you going to have to upload? What type of questions are they asking? And I would recommend that you go a step further and start drafting your answers to those questions, because often questions don't change that much year to year. And with all of that work done, you'll have so much more time. If there are new questions or if they tweak the question a little bit, you'll have a lot of time within those 2 weeks to just make some edits to your question, to your answers, rather than writing all of the answers within that 2-week period. We also recommend that you get an extra set of eyes, whether it be from an advisor, a friend, or a colleague, to ensure that your application is clear and compelling. Even if a funder is funding projects within your industry or your sector, they're probably not an expert on the industry certainly not as much as you are. And so you might write an application assuming their level of knowledge is much higher than it actually is, and it just goes over their head. They might not understand how important a problem you're facing is, or they might not understand, the potential that your industry is having, how fast it's growing, or the impact that it has on the state. So if you get someone outside of your business to read your application, they'll be able to say, you're using too much jargon. I really don't understand these words, or like, why is this important? You're not, I'm not getting it, which is really important because you're going to want to make it very clear to the funder why your application is important and why it could be very powerful. The second tip that we have for a compelling narrative is to incorporate context. What we mean by this is using data points, numbers, quantitative analysis to back up the arguments and claims that you're making in your grant. So for instance, let's say that you're doing a proposal and you'll be able to hire 5 new people. If you show that the county in which you're hiring has maybe a higher unemployment rate than the state or the national average, it'll make it much more compelling to the funder to say, in this county of high unemployment, I'm going to be hiring 5 new people. And that will make more of a difference than if I was in a county that, is experiencing very low unemployment. So it helps support your need and your proposed solution. Why is what you're proposing going to be so powerful? Has it been recommended in your industry? Is there an industry study that has said, this type of gear allows you to process, this type of equipment allows you to process you're manufacturing, whatever you're manufacturing, like 2 times faster. And that means that you can, double your capacity. So look for data from the US Census, news reports, industry studies. We have a list of potential resources for you in the guide, and see what you can use within your sphere of influence. So we're specifically talking about local and state data. If you're a coffee shop, you might not be talking about the global coffee bean trade because you're not operating on a global scale. Your sphere of influence might just be within your community or within the state. So keep the data to within your sphere of influence. The final tip in this section is understand the funder. Who is going to be giving you the funds? The first step is to find the funder's mission statement and giving priorities online. See what type of language they're using. See what their goals are. What are they trying to do through this grant? And then you can tailor your application to meet your funder's priorities and tell a story that interests the funder. Make sure that you're using some of the vocabulary that they're using. Make sure that you can show how your grant proposal helps to achieve the goals that they are achieving. Maybe they want to increase access to the arts for low-income children. And maybe they're working on a statewide or a regional level, but you can show how you're doing that in an area of very low income community. However, I do want to mention, this is not the time to change your proposal to fit what a grantor wants. It is never a recipe for success to do what we call chasing the purse strings. If you are changing the project that you want to do just because you think it's going to be more compelling, it's not going to work for anyone. It might be incredibly difficult for you to change to do something completely different than what you were planning to do. It might be very difficult for you to implement, and the funder is going to say, how did you use the money? How did you use it to, implement what you said you were going to implement? But it also doesn't help because you might have a goal with your current project. You want to get something done. You want to get a certain piece of equipment, and that's really going to help build your business. But if you change your project, it might not really have an impact on your business at all. You might get some money, but you have to spend that money on a project that doesn't really make a big difference to you. So this is not the time to just look at whatever funding is available and see if you can find a project that would fit it. This is a time for you to align strongly, make sure that you're finding a funder and the grant opportunity that really is aligned with the kind of project that you want to propose. Finally, and the third step in understanding the funder is research the organizations or businesses that got grants from this funder in the past. This is usually on the funder's website, and it gives you a sense of the types of projects the funder likes to fund, maybe also the geography. If you see that there's a lot in the county that you're in, that's a really good sign. But it also gives you a sense of how much money each grantee gets. You might be able to apply for $50,000, right? But when you're going through the list, you're seeing, okay, well, most of these grantees are getting $25,000 to $30,000. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply for the full 50,000, but it does mean that you should be thinking in your mind, okay, I'm probably not going to get the full amount. Maybe I need to think about other sources of funding, because while I might get some, I'm not going to get everything that I'm asking for. All right. So when you're really into the grant, maybe you're going through the fine print, you might come across some words that are unfamiliar to you. So we want to take this opportunity to just define some vocabulary terms. And the first is match. It might also be, defined as matching funds. And this is additional funding towards the project that you're proposing in your grant application that does not come from the grantor that you are applying to. So this would be something like you have a total project budget of $30,000. You want to buy a delivery van. Well, the grantor, if they want a matching funds to, maybe they want 50%, they will only fund you $15,000. They will not give you the full 30 to just say, yep, go buy a delivery van. They want to see that there's another funder or maybe an in-kind donor who's also in on this project. So to that end, eligible matching funds can include in-kind materials. This stepping aside from the delivery van, but maybe you're getting lumber donated because you're expanding your business, or an outdoor seating area or something like that. So that would count. You can put that how much it would have cost you to buy, it's getting donated. So you can include that in the type of in-kind funds. Sometimes it's harder. You might not find as many grants that offer or allow you to do in-kind labor. And you basically say, well, I'm going to build everything myself. So, here's how much that would have cost, or here's how much my time is worth. So, by putting in some sweat equity, I'm making an investment. You may or may not be able to do that depending on the grant. But you could also use your own, financial investment, a loan. Grantors love to be that gap financing. So going back to the delivery van example, you need $30,000, but you got a grant for $20,000. A loan for $20,000. You still have that $10,000 gap. A funder would love to come in and say, yep, I'll do that 10,000 because I already see that someone else is also really invested in this project, which would be, the bank that you got the loan from. You can also use other grants as matching funds that you got for the project that you're proposing, but it can't be from the same funder. So you can't go to USDA and say, well, I just got money from you 3 months ago, so that'll be my matching funds, because they'll say, no, someone else needs to be in on this project. Matching funds might be expressed as a ratio, like 1-to-1, or a percent. 1-to-1 is equal to 50%. So what that means is, they're only funding half of your total project budget. The second term is TIF, and we're including it here very briefly. If you're interested in tax increment financing, which is what TIF stands for, it's a much more complex conversation, typically involves lawyers. But because TIF is a financial incentive for businesses, you might hear about it when you look for funding opportunities. If you're looking for grants, securing some loans, someone might throw in the word TIF. So we wanted to just give you a sense of what that is, because it's nothing like grants. What a TIF is related to a redevelopment project of a blighted property in a certain city or town. By blighted, we mean abandoned, perhaps polluted, deteriorating. It's an eyesore. So unlike with grants, you're going to have to come up with most of the upfront funding. You're going to have to say, I can redevelop this building, and I have let's say most of the funding to do it, but I would love some help. And the town will say, we'll step in as your property taxes increase, as you increase the value of this property. We'll let you use some of that property tax money that you would have owed us to go back into your redevelopment. So maybe you can expand your redevelopment, or you can, do some additional projects. So again, it's not free money. It's not grant funding. You need to be able to execute this project. And it's really just another incentive to layer on. And again, it's a much larger conversation, but we just wanted to include it here because it's a totally different process than a grant application. The third term that you would hear with grants goes back to what we were saying was certain state or federal grants that require a municipality to apply on behalf of your project. If a municipality is applying, these grants often require that the town or city that your business is located in hold a public hearing. This is an opportunity for the residents of the city or town in which the business is located. Again, it's not where you live, it's where your business is, to comment on the proposed project. Do they want it there? Do they not like it? Do they want it to be amended? This is their time to provide input. Now, the city council or the town council may, simply make a recommendation based on their input, or they may actually do a vote to approve whether or not the city would apply for the project on your behalf. What you have to do to hold a public hearing is, of course, you would have to coordinate with the town manager and the town or city council. You have to get on the agenda, but you also have to advertise in a local newspaper a minimum of 10 days in advance. Typically 10 days, check the grant fine print, but usually it's 10 days ahead of the hearing. So that's an expense. You'll have to pay for it to appear in the local newspaper. Even if you don't get the grant, you can't get it reimbursed. That's an expense for you. You'll also have to make sure that you buy the newspaper that when the public hearing notice appears, because you'll have to usually upload that as evidence that it was advertised, with the correct amount of advanced hearing. So again, really something to note. This is a type of grant that you would need to do a lot of advanced planning for. It's not something that you can do within 2 weeks. It takes a lot longer to schedule a public hearing. But with that, with those tips, we'll talk about how to use the guide and dive into some of those funding categories. So again, the grant guide is organized by how the funds may be used, not by industry, because there are many grants that don't care, what type of business you have, what industry you're in. They're more interested in how you're going to use the money, whether it's for buying equipment, renovating your storefront, that type of project. The guide will then provide for each grant opportunity in that category a description that gives you a brief overview of what will be funded and what the goal is of that grant, how much funding you might request. Typically, there's only a maximum, but there are some grants where the funder says, we don't want to look at any grant application that's under $100,000. So that would be, the floor, and the ceiling might be $1 million. The guide will include whether or not matching funds are required, and if so, what the amount would be. When the deadline of the grant is, based on best available data. Again, check that. That is probably one of the pieces of data that is most flexible to a grantor. So you'll want to check eligibility, or who may apply for the grant. Again, is it a small business with 50 employees or fewer? Is it the city or town in which your business is located? This is, there's certain levels of eligibility here, and you have to meet all of the criteria. And then we end with, how to apply or how to find additional information with a link to the website or a contact person's email. So we'll dive into the funding categories. The first is research and development, R&D, and innovation. And grants in this space are focused on investing in technology, business development, innovative processes, applied research, and commercialization. So this is, the rare type of category where you can actually work on a product or a business, and it's not come to market yet. You're not already manufacturing it, but you really need some, money to to dive in and make sure that you're making a great product. Maybe you're prototyping something, maybe you're, maybe you're in the lobstering industry and you think you have a better idea for how to design gear, but you need, some funding to help you design a better piece of gear. This would be the opportunity for you. Funders in this space include Maine Technology Institute, or MTI, Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center, Maine International Trade Center, Northern Forest Center, and SBIR, which is a federal program. But I do want to, emphasize again, there are, even though, it might be an early stage, you're researching, a new type of product, that type of thing. There are specific eligibility requirements where it can't just be, I have an idea and I haven't really done anything to advance that idea to the next stage. This is this wouldn't technically, this might not be the fit for you. You might want to do a pitch competition or a business development program first and then look at a grant. And again, this is also very specific in like a tech sphere, which might not apply to the type of business that you have. The second funding category is artistic projects. So grants would support the creation of new or the continuation of artistic work and professional development for artistic creative professionals. The main funder in this space is the Maine Arts Commission. The third funding category is marketing and facade, kind of looped in together, because marketing grants are very few and far between to come by. So the marketing grants that are available are typically targeted to very small businesses, but are fairly agnostic to industry. It's really about how are you getting your business out there, regardless of what type of business that you have. Facade improvement grants are more widely available. And these would be funds for the preservation, rehabilitation, or renovation of your storefront, typically within a downtown center. And it may require that your design of the storefront adhere to historical standards. So does it look like how the building looked when it was originally built? And funders in this category include New Ventures, which would be for the marketing, Maine Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, and the Maine Downtown Center. However, a major funder in this space are the individual cities and towns across Maine. They have their own facade and/or marketing grants. Most are focused on that facade storefront category, but some are broader and can include marketing or business development and expansion costs. We do list every municipal grants within the marketing and facade category that we could find in Maine, illustrated here by the graphic. However, did want to mention that municipal grant programs are funded in two ways. The first is it's their own money. It's tax revenue dollars. Maybe they've partnered with a few local philanthropic funders. And so the town is really in charge of how long the grant will be available for, or how long the grant program will be available for, what the guidelines are and that type of thing. But the second type of funding for these municipal grant programs is through a federal grant like the Community Development Block Grant. Again, so they're getting money from the federal or state level, typically in a 3-year grant format. So grant programs that are listed in the guide might be on year 3 of their multi-year grant. And so the next year they might not be available. And we don't know that. So you'll want to check, your municipality's website to see if it's still live. However, it could be just as likely that a new city or town that's not on the list currently applies for one of these 3-year grants and gets it. And so then there would be a new grant program that's available for 3 years. So you'll typically, if that were the case, you might see that in your local newspaper, or, on the website, a bulletin to let you know that that would be the case. The next funding category is major capital. And again, this is pretty business. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, but the funding would be for purchasing equipment, acquiring land or property, or investing in construction or renovation of your business property. Funders in this category include the Maine Community Development Block Grant, Brownfields programs, which are operated through different funders and organizations throughout the state of Maine. Northern Borders Regional Commission and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA. There are grants for the training of new or incumbent employees. Incumbent simply means they're already hired, they're your existing workforce. The main funder in this category is the Maine Quality Centers, which is run through the Maine Community College Center, or the Maine Community College System, sorry. And then the next category is more industry specific. It's on food, beverage, and agriculture, all kind of looped into one. Here, though, while it's specific to an industry, the types of projects that you can use with the funds are very diverse. You could expand production, market your products, conduct research and development, invest in value-added processing, or supporting local food systems. So funders in this category include U.S. Department of Ag, the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, CEI, NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. That's, aquaculture is also included in this category, and the Maine Farmland Trust. Now, these next three categories, these are the final three categories, are somewhat different, a little special. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on them. The first is COVID-19 grants. We did still include them in this grant. And that's simply out of caution that there may be an instance where these need to come back, where let's say over the winter, and funders decide that businesses do need an extra injection of capital to get them through. So they may bring these grants again for another round of funding. Typically, these grants invest in resilient strategies for small businesses. So how can you protect yourself in the future? Or covering operational expenses from the losses that you sustained. Again, they may no longer be available, but we wanted to include them just in case the funders decided to offer another round of funding. The funders in this category include the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Island Institute, Small Business Administration, and various cities and towns throughout Maine have their own COVID-19 resiliency grant programs, and we do list those in the guide. The next category is national private grants. Now, we kept this list intentionally very small, and we made sure to vet very heavily. Again, going back to the grant search, where there are so few opportunities for for-profit grants that, scammers abound. And you may find that on a national level, of course, scammers are probably going to be on the national level because they want to, reach the largest audience that they can. So the first caveat is to be very careful when you're looking at a national grant. And that's why the list that we offer is small and targeted. Most of the grants on the national level support small business owners, but they might be targeted to very specific demographics like women of color or veterans. We made sure that none of the grants in the list require an entry fee. Now, what we wouldn't include would be what we wouldn't deem to be a scam would be a grant by a membership organization that requires you to pay for its membership in order to receive the grant. And this is because there are many legitimate, credible membership organizations that you're paying to become a member of because they offer so much value to you, in addition to the grant that they may offer. So that's typically just one benefit of joining a membership organization. And it's very nice that they offer grant funding to their members. But we would not think that that would be an illegitimate grant to apply for. So I just wanted to make that distinction. Grants in this space on the national level may include a cash prize plus in-kind services. So you see the funders down below, FedEx is one of them. So with the FedEx grant and similar ones, you might receive a cash prize, but also a slate of small business services for free, through FedEx. However, we want you to be very intentional about national grants and know that they are not likely going to be your main grant strategy. The reason, or one of many, is that national grants are much more competitive because you're competing against a national, audience. But often they do not offer any more funding than the state, local, and federal grants that we use in the guide. So they just might not be worth your time. The other component to this is there's typically an online or social media voting component to being successful at receiving grant funding. So you need to be prepared with a very strong online or social media following. It's a little bit like a popularity contest. So that might not fit where you are with your business growth strategy or where you ever intend to be with your business. So just in general, if you find a national grant that seems well aligned and you're willing to spend the time to apply, we certainly wouldn't discourage it, but just know, the caveats that come with applying to a national private grant, and make sure that you've really looked at the grants that we provide on the local, state, and federal level to make sure that there aren't any that are more worth your time in that space. The final category that we include are pitch competitions and business development programs that foster innovation and entrepreneurship in Maine. And again, going back to the grant search tips, these competitions and programs may be friendlier to earlier stage startups and entrepreneurs with, just an idea than grant opportunities. So these are a really good first step. If you are someone that has an idea and needs some funding or some expertise to get started, but you might find that, grants are just not a successful revenue strategy for you right now. So these include competitions in which you're competing against, a field of other entrepreneurs and small businesses and startups that if you were to win, you would receive a significant cash prize. But they also include business development programs that you may need to pay for in order to apply or to enter into the program. But we would not consider this to be illegitimate because you're paying for the expertise. And, it's usually like a 12-week business development program where you're going soup to nuts. You might just be starting with an idea and you're ending with a business plan, and you've talked to customers and you understand how to grow your business. The grant or the cash prize at the end is really just a bonus because you really have yourself set. And we would recommend that you would do this, regardless of whether or not you're applying for a grant, because it gives you such a good foundation. But it's also a really good kind of credential to have in your grant application to show that you've gone through, that you've worked with experts in fields of accounting, marketing, logistics. They typically have a lot of different experts available to you. So you can say that, you have a solid foundation and now you can go to the next level. Typically grants aren't starting you at the first level. They want to help you go to the next level. They want to take you not from 0 to 1, but they want to take you from, 1 to 2 or 1 to 10 even. So the competitions in this space and the business development programs include Big Gig, Bowie, Maine, the Gorham Savings Bank Launchpad, Greenlight Maine, Top Gun, and Maine Farmland Trust. So want to end on some concluding thoughts. Hopefully you've heard me say this earlier in the presentation, but just to nicely wrap up. Again, grant funding is not for all businesses nor for all business stages. It is not the first form of funding that you'll typically seek, nor may it cover your most pressing expenses. So you may not have seen anything in those funding categories that relates to the projects that you want to invest in and that are going to be important for your business. And that's important to know. Don't waste your time applying for a grant if it's not going to, move your business forward. Maybe you can spend that time and energy and effort on, acquiring new customers, lifelong customers who are going to, build your business, help you build your business. Another thing to note is eligibility requirements are strict and are often based on projected job growth or economic support for low to middle income communities. Again, there are really no grants simply for women in small business. It has to be, a woman in small business who's hiring 10 people in a high unemployment county, or, who's going to be tripling their consumption of, Maine blueberries for, the production of some food product that you have. You really need to pay attention to those eligibility requirements and just know that it might not be for you. Your business might not be the right size, whether, employment wise or revenue wise. It might not be in a county that funders are particularly interested in. Again, funders are looking for a wider impact other than just on your business. They want the community to thrive in some way through their investment in your business. National private grants, again, do not offer significantly larger funding amounts than local or state opportunities, but there is significantly more competition for those grants. So weigh whether it's worth your time. As well, you'll want to keep in mind that the grant application process requires a compelling narrative, as well as many financial statements, budgets, and organizational documents, so prepare early. You will also want to know that the time commitment is not just up front, but it also comes at the end, because many funders require post-grant reports that detail how did you spend your money, how did you measure the outcomes, and was your goal achieved? So you'll also need to measure throughout the period of the grant how you were spending the money, and having measurements to make sure that you're achieving what you said you would achieve in the grant proposal. But finally, when well aligned with your needs, grants can be an important method of raising capital. And we would encourage you to continue this conversation with a CEI advisor for help in planning your application. So Sarah, I think I'm just going to slip aside to the final slide so you can talk a little bit about the programs that the CEI Women's Business Center offers.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. So that was an excellent presentation on grants. Thank you so much. We know that access to capital can be a huge barrier for female entrepreneurs specifically, and we really are passionate about helping you get the funding that you need to start or grow your business. Listed on this slide is just a brief overview of many of the workshops that we have going on. You can find them all on our website. We're also talking about them constantly in our online newsletter, on Facebook or Instagram. Our goal is to bring women together to learn from experts and also to learn from one another as peers and as entrepreneurs. So we do hope you'll join us for an upcoming workshop or to schedule an advising session. And we really appreciate your time with us today. Thank you so much.